Today we shall continue with our series of Dhamma talks on the four establishments of mindfulness, the four Satipatthanas, and out of these we have dealt already with the mindful contemplation of the body, Kaya-Anupassana Satipatthana. We have also dealt with the mindful contemplation of feelings, Vedana-Anupassana Satipatthana, as well as Chitta-Anupassana Satipatthana, mindful contemplation of the mind. And then we went on to discuss some general aspects concerned or related to the fourth establishment of mindfulness, named Dhamma-Anupassana Satipatthana. And then we explored one aspect out of the five hindrances, namely the hindrance of sense desire, Kamacchanda, Nivarana. And so let this Kamacchanda stand for or explain basically or the basic principles that apply to the mindfulness of the hindrances. And today we shall go on and explore the next aspect, the next item under Dhamma-Anupassana Satipatthana, which comes in the form of the five aggregates. The five Pancha Khanda, or sometimes also known as the five aggregates of clingings, Pancha Upadana Khanda in the Pali scriptural language. Now, the instruction given in the Satipatthana Sutta for the contemplation of the five aggregates is as follows, and allow me to quote from Venerable Analaya's translation of the relevant passage based on a translation by Venerable Jnana Muni. A meditator knows such is material form, such its arising, such its passing away. Such is feeling, such its arising, such its passing away. Such its perception, such its arising, such its passing away. Such are mental formations, such their arising, such their passing away. Such is consciousness, such its arising, such its passing away. So these five aggregates need to be understood in different ways, namely to know the nature of each of these five aggregates, and then also to be aware of and to understand the arising and the passing away of these aggregates. And so we have two aspects here: knowing the nature of the aggregates as well as the aspect of impermanence. Now, this contemplation of the five aggregates covers five very predominant aspects of our human experience. And these five aggregates, namely the aggregate of materiality, Rupa Khanda, the aggregate of feelings, Vedana Khanda, the aggregate of perception, Sanya Khanda, the aggregate of mental formations, Sankhara Khanda, as well as the aggregate of consciousness, are organized by way of increasing subtlety. And so when a meditator sets out practicing, then he or she most likely will come across the material formations first, since they are the courses. And then, as mindfulness improves, then the perception of, or then the feelings come into the foreground, later on perceptions come into the foreground, and then mental formations come into the foreground. And the most refined aggregate is definitely that of consciousness. So it takes quite some practice to, at least on occasion, gain an understanding or an inkling what this consciousness is all about. The contemplation of the 5 aggregates represents a major aspect of the Buddha's instruction, and this the contemplation of the aggregates can lead to the attainment of the ultimate goal, namely to full the gaining of full enlightenment. Now, as a textual reference for this, let me quote from the Samyutta Nikaya, the 22nd Samyutta, namely the collected or connected discourses on the aggregates. And there is a short, there's a discourse that describes how the 5 ascetics who had practiced together with the Buddha to be the Bodhisattva for a number of years, and they had practiced together ascetic practices, and not really gaining realization. Neither the 5 ascetics nor the Bodhisattva. And eventually, the Buddha to be left his group of spiritual friends, and went on with his journey, and also changed his approach to the meditation practice. And so he chose the more balanced approach, the so-called middle path, and focusing on the practice of mindfulness, and then in the end he did gain full enlightenment or full awakening. And then, having spent 7 weeks in different places, or enjoying or enjoying the fruits of his attainment, then he went in search of. Then he wanted to share the Dhamma that he had gained with others, and so eventually he then decided to teach this Dhamma to his fellow practitioners, namely the 5 ascetics. I'm quoting discourse number 59 from the Vivekananda Samyutta, translation by Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi. Thus have I heard, on one occasion the Blessed One was dwelling at Varanasi in the deer park at Vivekananda. There the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus of the group of 5 thus: Bhikkhus, Venerable Sir, those certain monks replied, the Blessed One said this: Bhikkhus, form is non-self. For if, Bhikkhus, form were self, this form would not lead to affliction, and it would be possible to have it of form. Let my form be thus, let my form not be thus. But because form is non-self, form leads to affliction, and it is not possible to have it of form. Let my form be thus, let my form not be thus. Then the same thing for feeling. Feeling is non-self and perception is non-self. Then the mental formations are non-self and consciousness is non-self. And then the Buddha goes on to ask the monks, what do you think is form, permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Venerable Sir. Is what is impermanent suffering or happiness? Suffering, Venerable Sir, is what is impermanent suffering and subject to change, fit to be regarded thus. This is mine, this I am, this is myself. No, Venerable Sir. Is feeling permanent or impermanent? Is perception permanent or impermanent? Are mental formations permanent or impermanent? And consciousness, is it permanent or impermanent? Upon this, the monks, the ascetics, reply, impermanent, Venerable Sir. Is what is impermanent suffering or happiness? Suffering, Venerable Sir. Is what is impermanent suffering and subject to change, fit to be regarded thus. This is mine, this I am, this is myself. No, Venerable Sir. Therefore, bhikkhus, any kind of form whatsoever, whether past, future, or present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, all form should be seen as it really is with correct wisdom thus. This is not mine, this I am not, this is not myself. And then any kind of feeling whatsoever, and then the same thing for the other aggregates. Seeing thus, because the instructed noble disciple experiences revulsion towards form, revulsion towards feeling, revulsion towards perception, revulsion towards mental formations or volitional formations, revulsion towards consciousness. Experiencing a revulsion, one becomes dispassionate. Through dispassion, the mind is liberated. When it is liberated, there comes the knowledge it is liberated. One understands, destroyed is birth, the holy life has been lived, what had to be done has been done, now there is no more for this state of being. That is what the Blessed One said, elated those speakers, delighted in the Buddha's, in the Blessed One's statement. And while this discourse was being spoken, the minds of the bhikkhus of the group of 5 were liberated from the chains by non-clinging. What this discourse shows us is that through which kind of the contemplation did the 5 ascetics or 5 bhikkhus gain the Dhamma. Impermanent, yes, and what else? Pardon? Non-attachment, and what else? Non-self, yes, indeed. And what about the aspect of dukkha? Indeed. So what we have here is, the Buddha gave a very structured discourse to this group of 5 ascetics, previously 5 ascetics, and so a discourse on the 5 aggregates, and then asking the bhikkhus whether these 5 aggregates are, whether each and every of those 5 aggregates are truly permanent or impermanent, and then or conducive to happiness or conducive to suffering. And so then, since they answered that the formations of the five aggregates are impermanent and conducive to suffering, then it follows that the same formations lack a self. Hence, they are not under the control of the self. They are not the self, but rather they all lack the self, and hence they are anatta. And so, as is stated at the very end of this shorter discourse, how far did the five ascetics, or which level did they reach in level of enlightenment? Arahantship, and this is expressed through words such as what had to be done has been done, and liberated are they without any rebirth to come. So what this shows is that when the Buddha gave this discourse and the five ascetics practiced accordingly, they gained arahantship, they gained full realization. This shows the potential of the contemplation of these five aggregates. Realization of the arahantship doesn't happen just like this in a haphazard manner, but rather certain conditions need to be met. And so what do you think? By being strongly attached to this body of ours, by strongly being attached to feelings, by strongly being attached to our perceptions, and to those mental formations, and to consciousness, is it in this way that we gain full realization or not? Huh? Not at all. However, what do human beings do? Well, they tend to be highly attached to the body, to feelings, to perceptions, and to mental formations, and to consciousness. And this is frequently being expressed as follows, namely, oh, my body is full of pains, and my hardness, my heat and burning sensation, and so on. And then when it comes to feelings, then people wrongly say, oh, I feel miserable, or I feel totally angry, and similar expressions can be heard. Now, actually, these kind of statements don't belong under the aggregate of feelings, but rather under the aggregate of mental formations or volitional formations. However, people will still say, or will make statements such as, oh, my pleasant feeling, or I have an unpleasant feeling. And so frequently, what we have here, there's a certain, or actually quite a big identification with one's feelings. Now, the same thing goes for the whole range of perceptions, and these are being seen as belonging to oneself. So, my perception, and my perception of the sound, my perception of the sight, and so on. And then, with regard to the volitional formations, we've discussed this already, and then with regard to consciousness, it's somewhat the same. In a very subtle or very on a deeper level, there's a very strong attachment to this particular aggregate, even though it's not that obvious right away. So in order to gain this full realization of the Dhamma in the form of arahantship, we need to see reality for what it is. We need to see the tremendous attachment and clinging to the aggregates. And this becomes possible, this becomes possible only if we apply mindfulness to what happens over and over again. As we do this, we'll see formations as being impermanent. We see material formations to be impermanent, we see feelings to be impermanent, and the same thing goes for the other aggregates. Now, as we keep seeing formations like this, then sooner or later a revulsion, a dispassion, a disenchantment towards formations arises, and this then eventually will lead to detachment. And so once the detachment towards the five aggregates is there, then a realization of the Dhamma becomes possible. So in general we can say it is a process of applying mindfulness to what is actually going on as part of or in the context of the five aggregates, and then seeing these aggregates in a true way, in a profound way, and then gradually getting disappointed with them, and then even developing equanimity, detachment towards them. To give you a reference for the strong desire and attachment that certain human beings tend to have towards the five aggregates. And again, I'm quoting from the Khanda Samyutta. So it's the 48th discourse, and it's entitled Aggregates. At Sawati, bhikkhus or meditators, I will teach you the five aggregates and the five aggregates subject to clinging. Listen to that. And what bhikkhus are the five aggregates? Whatever kind of form there is, whether past, future or present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, this is called the form aggregate. Whatever kind of feeling there is, this is called the feeling aggregate. And then the same thing for perception, and then for the volitional formations, and for consciousness. So whatever kind of consciousness there is, whether past, future, or present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, this is called the consciousness aggregate. These bhikkhus or meditators are called the five aggregates. What bhikkhus are the five aggregates subject to clinging? Whatever kind of form there is, whether in past, future, present, and so on, that can be clung to. This is called the form aggregate subject to clinging. Whatever kind of feeling there is that is tainted, that can be clung to, this is called the feeling aggregate subject to clinging. And then the same thing for perception, then for mental or volitional formations, and for consciousness. And so it says for consciousness, whatever kind of consciousness there is, whether past, future, or present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, that is tainted. that can be clung to. This is called the consciousness aggregate subject to clinging. These bhikkhus are called the 5 aggregates subject to clinging. What this discourse also gives us is a short definition of what is meant by the term khanda, or translated in English as aggregate. Namely, it is an umbrella term that covers the events or the objects from objects of the past, present, or future, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, near or far, with regard to each and every of the aggregates. So the rupa aggregate then covers all bodily formations of the past as well as the present as well as the future, and in every possible way. The same Samyutta collection on the khandas gives some very nice illustrations for the 5 aggregates, and these illustrations bring across the point that each and every of the aggregates is void, hollow, and insubstantial. And so the first illustration given by the Buddha is as follows: because suppose that this river Ganges was carrying along a great lump of foam. A man with good sight would inspect it, ponder it, and carefully investigate it, and it would appear to him to be void, hollow, insubstantial. For what substance could there be in a lump of foam? So too, bhikkhus or meditators, whatever kind of form there is, whether past, future, present, internal, and so on, a meditator who inspects it, ponders it, and carefully investigates it, and it would appear to him to be void, hollow, insubstantial. And for what substance could there be in form? And the illustration given for feelings by the Buddha for the insubstantiality of feelings is that of big raindrops falling, and they cause water bubbles to form and to burst on the surface of water. So when, as a meditator, one were to examine these water drops carefully, or bubbles carefully, then one would find that they are void, hollow, and insubstantial. Now, the illustration given by the Buddha for perception is that of the last month of the hot season. At high noon, a shimmering mirage when a shimmering mirage appears. Now, when a person with good eyesight inspects this mirage, then he or she will eventually come to find that this mirage is just void, hollow, and insubstantial. So the same thing goes for perceptions. And then the illustration given for volitional formations, or the sankharas, is that of hardwood. Suppose that a man needing a hardwood, seeking a hardwood, wandering in search of hardwood, would take a sharp axe and enter the forest. There he would see the trunk of a large plantain tree, straight, fresh, without a fruit but certain cord. The man would cut it down at the root, cut off the crown, and unroll the coil. As he unrolled the coil, he would not find even softwood, let alone hardwood. A man with good sight would inspect it, ponder it, and carefully investigate it, and it would appear to him to be void, hollow, insubstantial. And then the same thing goes for the volitional, for these mental formations. Now, the illustration given for the insubstantiality of mental formations is of consciousness, is that of a magician who performs some miracle at a crossroads, and at first sight it might seem so true, so real, yet upon closer inspection one finds that it is just a trick, just the work of a magician. And so one finds out that it is void, hollow, and insubstantial. The same thing goes for consciousness. So when, as a meditator, we carefully inspect what exists in what is called a being, and so what is given a certain name during the baptizing ceremony, turns out to consist of just mere hollow and void, hollow, and insubstantial formations. This analysis of one's being into the five aggregates very much helps a meditator to realize that these formations really lack a self, and that there is no owner of these formations. They cannot be referred to, ultimately speaking, as my leg, or my finger, my this or that. Now, when a meditator undertakes intensive satipatthana, the meditation, for a longer period of time, then he or she might make the following discovery. Namely, as this meditator is going through the different insight knowledges, the person will see that these insight knowledges, one insight knowledge at a time, is not arising in a haphazard manner, but rather there's certain underlying structure which comes in the form of the five aggregates. So a meditator who is developing the next or particular insight knowledge is likely to experience material formations for a while. Those will be in the foreground, and then only after these have been seen properly, then will the practice move on into the feelings, and so the feelings become more predominant and are therefore the meditator to scrutinize. Once this has been done properly, then quite naturally perceptions will come into the foreground, and they too they need to be inspected. The same thing goes for the sankharas in for consciousness. And usually the actual intuitive insight arises towards the end of one, or towards the end of the contemplation of one of the insights. And so it marks the peak of it. Now, with just a little bit of practice, let's say a 10-day retreat, it's not going to be easy to see this underlying structure, since many coarser formations, other formations are taking place and may be pulling one's attention. The contemplation of the 5 aggregates is certainly beneficial in several ways, and one of them is that this contemplation helps the meditator to see how an aggregate is, or how the aggregates as a whole are conditioned by certain phenomena, and how aggregates themselves can condition other phenomena. So the law of cause and effect plays a certain role. To give you an example for this, when some annoying event is being registered, then this will lead to the arising of the mental factor of ill will, and this thing in turn will have an impact on the aggregate of feelings and the aggregate of materiality. And the body might then tense up, and the heart rate may go up, and there may be an increased amount of perspiration, and so on. And so the anger will manifest in the body in a certain way. And likewise, then can we say that owing to certain physical conditions, the anger might arise in the mind. Now, when it comes to the first aggregate of Rupa and Khanda, then this frequently gets defined as consisting of the 4 primary elements. So those 4 primary elements occur in different combinations, and as such they make up materiality. Another definition of Rupa Khanda, the formations of materiality, can be found in the Samyutta Nikaya, in the section section on the aggregates, number 86, and there it says, material form refers to whatever is affected by external conditions such as the cold and heat, and hunger and thirst, mosquitoes and snakes, and so on. So external conditions are then shaping this aggregate of materiality. And an expression used in the actual discourse is that of forming and deforming. So the objects of the materiality aggregate will have a certain form, and then under the influence of under some external influence will they be deformed. When it comes to the aggregate of feelings, then these this aggregate is defined in the Visuddhimagga as follows, namely, whatever has the characteristic of being felt should be understood, all taken together as the feeling aggregate. It is felt, that is why it is called feeling. And this feeling is of 3 kinds, using one classificatory system, but it could also be of 5 kinds. So the threefold feeling consists of pleasant, unpleasant, neutral feeling, whereas the 5-fold division refers to bodily pain, and then bodily pleasure, and then mental joy, and then also mental pain, and then the last one is equanimity. In a similar definition for perception, we find in the Visuddhimagga the following, namely, whatever has the characteristic of being, of perceiving, should be understood, all taken together as the perception aggregate. Now, maybe this much for today on the 5 aggregates. More will be explained in detail during the forthcoming Dhamma talk on Wednesday, in particular on the aggregate of perception, sanya, kanda. Let me conclude by wishing may the contemplation of the aggregate as it may arise in your meditation practice once in a while, may it help you to see that all formations related to the 5 aggregates are impermanent, are unsatisfactory, and are lacking a self. They're void, hollow, and certainly insubstantial. And then may this contemplation lead you on to the natural development of revulsion and disenchantment towards these same formations, and may this then prepare the ground for the actual realization of the Dhamma. And this is it for tonight.